The lifelong feud between the Queen Mother and Wallis Simpson. The abdication shock. The feud truly began in December 1936, when King Edward VIII announced that he would abdicate the throne to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. For Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, who suddenly found herself thrust into the role of Queen Consort when her husband George VI became king, this was nothing short of devastating. She had always seen Edward as reckless, but she could never forgive Wallis for pushing him to abandon his sacred duty. In Elizabeth's eyes, Wallis had destabilized the monarchy at one of its most vulnerable times. Support from Queen Mary. Queen Mary, mother of Edward VIII and George VI, played a crucial role in deepening Elizabeth's feelings. Mary despised Wallis and refused ever to receive her formally, setting the tone for how the rest of the family treated the Duchess of Windsor. Elizabeth took comfort in Mary's support, seeing their shared hostility as proof that Wallis did not belong. Whenever doubts arose about how harshly Wallis was treated, Elizabeth could point to Mary's example. This alliance between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law cemented a family-wide policy of keeping Wallis at arm's length. Social exile for Wallis. After the abdication, Edward and Wallis were granted the titles of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, but their life was one of exile. Elizabeth ensured Wallis would remain an outsider, never fully welcomed into the royal fold. Invitations to family events were rare, and when they came, they were usually fraught with tension. To Elizabeth, excluding Wallis was a way to protect the monarchy's dignity and to remind her that she would never be accepted as a true royal. This quiet campaign of social banishment left Wallis isolated, fueling her own bitterness toward the family. Life as the reluctant queen. The abdication left George VI and Elizabeth scrambling to steady the monarchy. George had never wanted to be king, and the pressure was immense. Elizabeth always felt that her husband's early passing in 1952 was directly linked to the stress and strain of ruling, a role he should never have been forced to take. She carried this bitterness as a personal wound, blaming Wallis for robbing them both of a quieter life. For her, Wallis was not just a scandalous figure, but the reason she lost the man she loved too soon. This grief hardened her dislike into a lifelong grudge. The Queen Mother's popularity versus Wallis's isolation. As decades passed, the contrast between the two women only grew sharper. The Queen Mother was adored by the British public, especially during the tough times, when she famously refused to leave London. She became a symbol of resilience and duty, while Wallis remained abroad, seen by many as a frivolous figure living in luxury with Edward. Elizabeth's rising popularity stood as proof, in her mind, that she had taken on the role Wallis had destroyed. The wider the gap between their reputations, the more firmly Elizabeth dug her heels in, determined to never forgive. The feud outlives Edward. Even after Edward VIII's passing in 1972, the Queen Mother's hostility toward Wallis did not soften. Wallis, widowed and increasingly frail, might have been offered sympathy, but Elizabeth refused to let go of the past. She never extended an olive branch or allowed for reconciliation, even though decades had passed. To Elizabeth, the damage Wallis had caused could never be undone. She remained steadfast in her refusal to forgive, carrying her resentment until her own death in 2002. The feud, in many ways, defined how she saw her duty and her personal loyalties. A family divided in loyalty. The feud also created difficult family dynamics. Queen Elizabeth II was far more restrained in her dealings with Wallis, keeping the dignity of her office, but avoiding the open hostility of her mother. Still, she followed Elizabeth's lead in keeping Wallis at a distance. Other royals occasionally wavered, with some offering small gestures of courtesy, but the Queen Mother's powerful presence ensured no full reconciliation was possible. Her refusal to forgive became the standard that others followed, keeping Wallis forever on the outside.